The first time Darren Holt saw her, she was sitting alone on the scorched steps of the old transport bay, legs tucked under her like she had all the time in the universe. Her skin was pale under the colony's twin suns, her hair a strange golden hue that the wind couldn't seem to tousle properly, and her ears, slightly pointed, not grotesquely so, but just enough to mark her, twitched every time a hover cart passed too close. She didn't look dangerous. She looked like someone who might recite poetry or teach violin to emotionally disturbed robots. Still, everyone avoided her like she was wrapped in explosive nanofilament. Darren didn't have the luxury of avoidance. As the acting systems chief, a position he inherited after the original chief fell into a cryogenic waste tank during a drinking contest, he had to check every outpost module personally after the last solar flare, which was how he found himself walking straight toward her, holding a half-melted diagnostics pad and muttering curses at the fried circuitry gods. "You're in front of Module 12's access panel," he said, without looking at her directly. "I know," she replied calmly, her voice carrying the faint melody of a language that wasn't made for shouting. "Then you also know I need to get in there." She tilted her head, then stood without another word and stepped aside. As she passed him, he caught the faint scent of ionized air and something floral. Not that he cared. He didn't. Darren tried to focus on the task, but the panel's override lock was jammed, and the pad kept suggesting emergency detonation as its first solution. He cursed again, softer this time. "I could help," she offered. He glanced at her. "Can you hotwire outdated Terran modules without setting off every alarm from here to Sector 9? "I did once by accident." The alarms were quite melodic. He snorted before he could stop himself. "Great, just what this place needs, more musical disasters." But he handed her the pad anyway. She crouched beside the panel, her long fingers moving with uncanny precision. In less than a minute, the override hissed open, the lights flickered, and the panel beeped a cheerful little tone that had been designed back when engineers thought morale was directly linked to sound effects. "There," she said, standing again. "No alarms this time." Darren stared. "What did you even wait? You bypassed the security protocol." "I hummed the root frequency of the lock. Human locks are very trusting." He blinked. "You sang the door open." She nodded. It wasn't a complex tune. Darren muttered something about installing more paranoid firmware. Later that night, as he sat in the mess hall poking at something the food unit swore was lasagna, he found himself replaying the moment. Not the technical part, that was impressive but annoying, but the way she'd looked at him. Not with contempt or gratitude or whatever emotion humans expected from Leora survivors. She looked at him like she was measuring him. Like he was a puzzle that didn't quite match the box image. "You're staring at your lasagna again," said Sira. The colony's medical AI in a humanoid exoframe that looked like it had been designed by a committee of polite blindfolded artists. "Should I call maintenance?" "Why would I need maintenance?" "Because you've been sitting motionless for 12 minutes. Statistically, that's either deep contemplation or a stroke." "Thanks, Sira. Go scan someone who's actually malfunctioning." "I already did. He's eating your lasagna." Darren looked down. His tray was empty. Across the table, a lanky engineer named Roge gave him a thumbs up, mouth full. "Good texture," Roge mumbled. "You weren't using it right." Darren stood with a sigh. "Remind me to reprogram the food units. Make them shock people who steal meals." "Noted," Sira said. "Shocking behavior protocols initialized." "I was joking." Humans frequently say that after they've made good decisions. He left the hall and wandered out into the cooling dusk. The stars were beginning to push through the purple sky, and the desert winds had calmed for once. Somewhere nearby, an old satellite dish rotated slowly, groaning like a drunk trying to remember his hotel room number. And there she was again, sitting on the same steps. He hesitated. His instincts told him to walk the long way around, pretend he had business elsewhere, maybe dive into a ventilation shaft and claim he was doing maintenance. But instead, he walked up and sat beside her. No words for a while. Just the sound of wind brushing over rusted metal and the occasional chirp of a nocturnal scanner drone that had developed a fondness for singing like a parrot. Finally, she said, "You look less angry than usual. I'm trying something new. It's called not yelling at things I can't fix. Is it working?" "No." She smiled, just a flicker, but it was there. "I'm Carol," she said after another long pause. "You already know that, but I've never said it to you." "Darren." "I know." He chuckled. "Right, of course." Another silence, but this one was less awkward. More like the kind you might choose if you weren't in a hurry. After a while, Carol asked, "Do humans always fear what they survive?" Darren didn't answer immediately. He looked up at the stars. "Not always," he said. "Sometimes we just pretend we don't remember." Carol nodded, as if that confirmed something she'd suspected for a long time. Then she said, "You remember me, from the breach line, don't you?" His heart stopped for a second. He didn't want to go back there, not to the fire, not to the screams, but yes, he remembered. Her face, bloodied but calm, dragging two human soldiers out of a burning tunnel, one of them his brother, and how she had looked back at Darren like she was daring him to stop her. He hadn't. "I remember," he said softly. Carol stared out at the dark horizon. "Then we'll talk tomorrow about what we do with that memory." He didn't know what that meant, but for once he didn't feel the need to argue. Instead, he leaned back, looked at the stars again, and said, "So, is it true you guys can talk to plants?" Carol looked at him, a single eyebrow arched. "Only the honest ones." The next morning began with a catastrophic beep. Darren's datapad, which normally took pride in announcing the weather with poetic flourish. A balmy 34 degrees with just a hint of plasma radiation in the breeze. Now simply flashed red and made a sound like a robot choking on gravel. That was never a good sign. "What now?" he groaned, one boot already half-laced. The message was brief. "Power relay failure in Ravine Zone 9. Manual inspection required. System drones offline. Bring someone who doesn't get vertigo." Darren sighed, finishing his boot with the resigned energy of a man who knew his day would likely involve climbing, falling, and swearing in multiple dialects. He stepped out onto the colony's main deck where the air still shimmered from the early heat, and the solar panels whined like spoiled children being forced to work. To his surprise, Carol was already waiting at the lift, wearing a light shield cloak and tapping an old datapad against her hip. "You're not coming with me," he said immediately. She tilted her head. "I already packed your anti-shock kit. You forgot it last time." "That's not wait, I did." He blinked still. "That doesn't mean." "I also brought food packets that won't explode at high altitudes." "That's disturbingly thoughtful. And I can sense magnetic pulse fractures, which might help avoid sudden fiery death." Darren opened his mouth, then closed it. He finally muttered, "Fine, but no singing open any more doors without warning me." No promises. The journey to Ravine Zone 9 was a 2-hour glide aboard the colony's least trustworthy crawler, affectionately named Rust Bucket Prime. It groaned like it was auditioning for a death scene in a bad opera, and had a tendency to break too hard, throwing passengers into philosophical debates with the dashboard. Carol sat cross-legged, seemingly immune to the bumps and lurches, while Darren gripped the handles like they were the only stable thing in the galaxy. "Did you program this thing to try and kill us?" he asked. "No," Carol replied, serene. "I merely encouraged it to explore its emotional range." They reached the ravine just as the sun tilted westward, sending long shadows over jagged cliffs and rusted-out relay towers. The air shimmered faintly with residual charge. Below, the main power junction blinked erratically, one of its stabilizers visibly sparking. Darren pulled up a scan. "Well, this is a nightmare. Signal relays are cooked, pulse converters look fried, and, oh look, someone left an empty soda pouch in the core cooling bay." "Classy." Carol crouched at the edge of the cliff, staring down with narrowed eyes. "There's a pattern in the sparking. It's rhythmic." Darren squinted. You think the relay is trying to communicate. Possibly, or it's just dying in a very artistic way. They climbed down using old scaffold ladders that groaned with every step. Darren nearly slipped twice and invented 2 new swear words in the process. Carol descended effortlessly, occasionally pausing to wait for him without comment. By the time they reached the relay base, Darren's hands were shaking and his back felt like it had been personally insulted by gravity. He knelt beside the core, scanning it again. Something's overriding the safety failsafes. Not just a glitch, someone or something is meddling. Carol placed her hand gently against the relay housing and closed her eyes. The faint blue glow that shimmered beneath her skin pulsed once, then faded. There's residual energy here. Not human, not Leora either, something older. Darren straightened, suddenly alert. Older like pre-war tech. Older than either of our histories. Terrific, he muttered. I came out here for a fried circuit, and now I'm starring in Ancient Aliens, real and probably angry. They worked in tandem, rerouting power manually, patching coils, and trying not to think too hard about the ominous hum growing stronger beneath their feet. The joke-laced banter between them faded slightly as the relay tower began to resist their efforts, literally. Screws refused to loosen, panels locked themselves again, and the diagnostic screen kept cycling through languages neither of them recognized. Finally, after hours of cursing, prying, and what Carol called gentle persuasion, she kicked it. The core rebooted with a flare of white light and a sound that resembled an alien yawn. The interface returned, briefly, then flickered and displayed a single word, remember. Darren stepped back. Okay, that's not creepy at all. Carol's expression darkened. We should go. As they climbed back up, the cliff rumbled beneath them, and a surge of heat pulsed from the canyon floor. The relay tower sparked again, but now its lights glowed in a soft sequence like a beacon. When they reached the top, Darren turned to look back. You think someone buried something down there? Not someone, Carol said quietly. Something. Darren rubbed his face. Great. We've got a haunted power station, a non-human message, and a relay that wants to express itself through interpretive sparking. I'd say that's a productive day. They started walking back toward the crawler, the wind now rising with a high-pitched whine that seemed to follow them. Behind them, the relay pulsed once more, bright, then dark. Darren glanced sideways. So, I've been meaning to ask. That thing you did with your hand back there, is that a Leora trick or just you being extra weird? Carol considered. Yes. Yes to which? She smiled. Exactly. Darren groaned. You're impossible. And yet you let me come. I didn't let you, you just showed up. Semantics. They reached Rust Bucket Prime, which greeted them with a groan and the smell of something burning that had never been installed in the first place. Darren climbed in, sighing deeply. Next time, he said, I'm sending a drone. Carol settled in beside him. You said that last time. And I'll say it next time too. The crawler rumbled back toward the colony. Behind them, far below, the relay continued to pulse, each beat echoing faintly like a warning or a whisper. The next 2 days at the colony felt like waiting for thunder after seeing lightning. Everyone sensed something had shifted. The relay in Ravine 9 had returned to full functionality, but the signal readings it sent back didn't match anything in the central system's database. Carol tried running pattern recognition. Darren tried swearing at it. Neither method yielded anything conclusive. To make matters worse, colony rumors multiplied like fungus in a hydroponics unit. One engineer swore he saw the relay tower breathe. A technician claimed her toaster had started broadcasting coordinates in Morse code. Someone else accused Carol of awakening ancient alien ghosts. That person was later found trying to exorcise the power grid with a wrench and a copy of Interstellar Housekeeping for Beginners. Council convened an emergency meeting. Darren hated emergency meetings. He sat in the back of the overheated chamber, sipping something that claimed to be coffee but tasted like bitter regret filtered through recycled socks. Carol, to his surprise, sat beside him, uninvited but unchallenged. Her presence made several counselors visibly uncomfortable, which Darren found mildly satisfying. "Let's get to the point," said Director Venn, who had mastered the art of sounding both bored and panicked. "There's an anomaly in Ravine 9, and 2 of our personnel encountered it directly. Mr. Holt, would you care to explain?" Darren stood, cleared his throat, and began with all the confidence of a man reading an unfamiliar recipe during a fire drill. "Well, the tower's power core rebooted itself after being, manually encouraged. By her." He gestured vaguely toward Carol, who waved politely. "Then it displayed a message, just one word: remember. And since then, the tower's been sending out low-frequency pulses that make no technical sense but somehow register in every spectrum we check." Director Venn pinched the bridge of his nose. "And your assessment?" "It's haunted, or it's a beacon, or both, possibly sentient, possibly bored. Either way, we should not poke it again." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Carol stood. "The structure is old. Not Leora, not human, something deeper. My people told stories, legends, about systems that outlived their builders. Machines that remembered even when no one was left to be remembered. Perhaps this is one. You're surprisingly good at it." They walked back toward the module zone in companionable silence, the kind that had begun to feel familiar, dangerously so. Somewhere along the way, Darren realized he'd stopped seeing Carol as a guest on borrowed soil. She was just here, part of the landscape, part of his landscape. Unfortunately, not everyone agreed. That night, someone painted a crude symbol on Carol's living unit. Bright red, angry strokes, an old war icon used by the anti-Leora resistance. Darren saw it first on his way back from the control station and stopped in his tracks. "Damn it," he muttered, scanning the area. No one in sight. No cameras nearby. He pulled out a rag and began wiping it off, then realized Carol was already there, standing silently. "I'll clean it," he said quickly. "It's nothing. Just some coward with a paint can and half a brain." Carol didn't respond. She walked up beside him, her gaze steady. "It doesn't frighten me. Still, it shouldn't be here. You shouldn't have to see this." Carol tilted her head. "You're angry." "Of course I'm angry." "At them?" "Yes, at you, no. Maybe a little, for being so composed. I've had practice." He sighed. "I'm terrible at this, the empathy thing." "You're better at it than you think. You tried to hug the fuel converter once." "That was one time and it looked sad." She smiled. "Just briefly." Then helped him finish scrubbing. Later that night, Darren sat alone on the observation platform with a blanket, a portable monitor, and a half-functional weather drone that had decided it wanted to name clouds. The stars glittered overhead and the ravine tower's pulse was barely visible, a tiny glimmer against the horizon. The drone beeped. "That cloud is named Bari." Darren squinted. "That's a star cluster. Bari can be anything if you believe in him." He considered turning the drone off. Instead, he leaned back and watched the lights. Carol joined him quietly, a second blanket draped over her arm. She didn't say anything, just settled beside him and handed him a ration bar that was only mostly unappetizing. For a while they sat in silence. Then she said, "The word it sent, remember. Do you think it meant the war?" Darren shook his head. "I think it meant us." She didn't respond, but her hand brushed against his on the metal bench. They stayed that way until Bari, the delusional drone, announced the arrival of a new cloud formation named Gary the Philosophical Nebula. The message changed overnight. It no longer simply blinked remember. Now it pulsed in 3-word sequences, shifting slowly between languages, some known, most not. Darren found it first, thanks to a sleep-deprived technician who burst into the command center at 400 yelling something about the haunted alphabet soup machine turning philosophical. When Carol arrived, still tying her outer tunic, Darren pointed at the monitor without a word. The translation lagged, flickering through options until it finally settled on a phrase, "Remember before fire." Carol stared. "That's not comforting." Darren muttered. It's either a poetic warning or the relays getting into creative writing. They ran diagnostics again. Everything showed nominal, no spikes, no instability, no breaches. Just a peaceful, humming tower that happened to be broadcasting metaphysical poetry into the void. Still, the council wanted a physical check. This time with a drone escort and a hard limit. No interaction, no direct contact, no experimental harmonics, and definitely no interpretive dancing. Who would even? Darren started. There's a clause now, Carol said. Apparently, someone attempted a dance-based calibration ritual last week. It was Roge, wasn't it? Wearing neon gloves. Stars help us all. The crawler hummed quietly as they traveled, this time with a small swarm of drones overhead and a maintenance unit named Peach, whose only apparent function was to beep suspiciously every few minutes and offer nutritional advice. They passed through the rusted canyon gates into the ravine, where the tower stood like a sentinel in sleep, haloed in soft light and electronic mystery. Darren disembarked first, scanning the air. No spikes, no static. Same quiet hum of vague doom. Carol approached the tower with practiced calm, hands at her sides, eyes scanning not the structure but the surrounding rock. Something buried here, she murmured, underneath the relay. Like what? A forgotten relic, secret tech, alien time capsule. Carol knelt and placed her palm on the ground. Memory storage, not data, imprint, emotional. Wait, you're saying the planet remembers something? Yes. Darren looked at the drones. Did you guys hear that? She's diagnosing the emotions of geology. Are we just rolling with this? One drone beeped once for yes, twice for please stop talking. They surveyed the area for hours, triangulating signal strength while Peach cheerfully reminded them to stay hydrated and consider colon-approved protein blocks. Beneath the sarcasm, though, the tension grew. The pulses from the tower were increasing in complexity, branching, layering, echoing across frequencies like a conversation happening just out of reach. At one point, Carol turned sharply toward the cliffs. There, she said. There's a secondary beacon. Darren followed her gaze. A jagged outcropping, seemingly ordinary. But the readings showed a patterned tiny electrical flutters that shouldn't be there. They climbed together, reaching the crest just as the sun dipped low. And then they saw it, not a structure, not exactly. A carved ring of metal embedded into the stone, its surface covered in faint glowing script. Old, pre-contact. Not human, not Leora. Carol stepped close. This is not a transmitter. It's a lock. A lock for what? Darren asked. She looked at him for memory. He stared. So we're not just poking a haunted relay. We're poking a sealed alien diary. Worse, she said, we're close to unlocking it. Great. I hope it contains warm childhood recollections and not, galactic vengeance. Carol knelt, scanning the ring. There's a frequency match between this and the relay. If both were activated simultaneously. Nope, Darren said, backing up. Whatever that sentence ends with, I vote no. Darren. Nope, I've seen this episode. It ends with something waking up and deciding it hates stairs and people. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her palms. If we don't unlock it, someone else will. The pulses are drawing attention. From whom? Carol didn't answer. Back at the colony, the mood had shifted. Whispers again, quiet looks. Someone had placed a tracking beacon on Carol's module. The data logs showed unauthorized access to the central relay codes, and the name attached to the breach request, Darren Holt. Council called another session. Darren stood in front of them, jaw tight, arms folded. I didn't authorize any breach. But the access came from your clearance, said Director Venn. Someone used your credentials. That doesn't mean it was me. And yet the command was issued less than an hour after you returned from the ravine. Carol stood. He was with me the entire time. Murmurs again. The room felt tighter than usual. Someone in the back coughed, a dry sound full of judgment. Carol added, if we're being honest, the breach command wasn't unauthorized. It was the system asking for permission. Darren turned to her, eyebrows raised. Are you saying the relay hacked us? I'm saying the memory lock needs a human voice. And it chose yours. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of a bored drone in the corner softly humming elevator music. Director Vin sat back. We'll need time to deliberate. Fine, Darren said, stepping away. Just remember, if a giant tentacled memory monster crawls out of that ravine, I'm blaming all of you. Outside, as the sky dimmed and the wind rose, Darren and Carol stood beside the observation platform again. She said nothing for a long while, just stared into the stars. Finally, he asked, "You really believe there's something buried here? Some ancient echo just waiting to be unlocked?" "Yes," she said, "and I believe it's been waiting for you." "Me?" He snorted. "The guy who once got electrocuted by a vending machine." Carol smiled faintly. "You survived more than that, the war, the loss, yourself." He sat, suddenly tired. "If I'm being honest, I'm not sure I'm the hero of this story." "You're not," she said, "but you might be the key." Somewhere in the distance, the ravine pulsed. The ground seemed to hum, like a heartbeat remembered too late. By morning, the colony was humming with tension barely hidden under routine. People walked faster, spoke quieter, glanced more often toward the ravine where the sky now pulsed faintly at night like it had a heartbeat. The council had called for silence, but secrets in a place this small spread like atmospheric mold, dry, clinging, and mildly toxic. Darren stood in the calm tower overlooking the colony's edge, sipping nutrient tea and ignoring the blinking light on his terminal that meant someone wanted a report. He hadn't filed one since Carol's revelation that the relay had chosen him. "Chosen," he muttered. "Sounds more dramatic than I'm comfortable with, like I'm about to sprout wings or start glowing." Behind him, a familiar voice replied, "If you do start glowing, I have just the cloak to match." He turned. Carol leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, expression unreadable but warm. "Council's still deliberating," she said. "Though someone did submit a motion to just unplug the relay and call it cursed." "Please tell me it was Roge." "Of course." Darren sighed. "We both know this won't stop on its own." Carol nodded. "The relay is synchronizing with the lock. A convergence event. It's not just memory, it's transfer, the past seeking a host. That would have been a helpful warning 2 weeks ago. I tried. You were busy yelling at vending machines." They made their way back to Ravine 9, this time on foot. No crawler, no drones, just wind, sun, and the low rumble of something ancient awakening. Carol walked with steady purpose. Darren walked with reluctant destiny. When they reached the relay, it was no longer just a tower. Vines of metal had emerged from its base, slowly unfurling across the stone like veins. Symbols glowed along the surface, letters that changed when you blinked. The lock above shimmered with light that hadn't existed in this world until now. Carol stepped forward first. "When it activates, you may see things that aren't entirely yours." "That's comforting." "They may not be entirely not yours either." "Less comforting." He placed his hand on the relay. Carol did the same on the lock. The air folded inward. Sound vanished, replaced by a pressure behind the eyes like memory trying to become sound. Darren saw everything, not in sequence, not in sense. 1,000 lives, 1,000 voices, civilizations rising, breaking, mourning, peace treaties signed in silence, starships singing lullabies into black holes. A war not between humans and Leora, but something far older. Something vast, and then something new, him and her. Darren stepped back with a gasp, nearly falling. Carol caught him, her hands firm, her eyes wide. "You saw it." "I saw too much, but yes, I saw us." She nodded. "The memory wanted anchors. Souls that had lost and endured. We fit." "Is that why you stayed?" "Yes, the memory needed a gate, but I stayed for you." That silence was different, not awkward, not heavy, full. Darren looked at the relay. "So what happens now?" "The memory is ours now, not a burden, a seed. It can be stored not in metal or code, but in us." Darren blinked. "Wait, are we memory flash drives now?" Carol's lips twitched, very durable ones. He looked around. The glow faded. The air stabilized. The relay now hummed gently, no longer pulsing. The lock above dimmed and sealed once more. Whatever had been waiting wasn't waiting anymore. They walked back slowly. The colony appeared ahead, roofs catching sunlight like nothing had changed. But things had. Back at the main module, the council greeted them with half-formed accusations. "You violated the," Ven started. "It's done," Carol interrupted. "The event has passed. The memory is settled." Ven blinked. "You speak as though what you know that." "I am that." She pointed to Darren. "So is he." There was silence. Darren stepped forward. "We didn't awaken a weapon. We didn't trigger a ghost. We carried a truth, one that needed witnesses. Now it has them." Ven looked unsure. Roge coughed. "So, do we need to file anything?" Carol turned to Darren. "Now." He nodded. She walked forward slowly. Not toward the council, but toward Darren. Her eyes shimmered, not with light from the relay, but with something older, deeper. She stopped in front of him. "I stayed because of duty. I stayed because of memory. But when the echoes cleared, when the silence ended, I found the truth under everything." He didn't breathe. She reached up, touched the side of his face. "You were the only thing I wanted to remember." The weight of it hit him like gravity doubling. "You could have just said you liked my tea," he whispered. Carol smiled through her tears. "That too." He laughed, stepped forward, and for once didn't hesitate. Later, when the sun dipped low and the relay pulsed no more, Darren and Carol sat on the observation deck again. The drone buzzed nearby. "That star's named Bari," it said. Carol tilted her head. "I thought Bari was a cloud." "He was promoted." Darren reached for her hand. She didn't resist. Peace was never loud. Sometimes it just sat beside you, quietly, and stayed.